welcome. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. We had a last minute typo on my behalf on the slides, so I got that fixed before we jumped in. But we're excited to talk about Meta a little bit today. I'm going to be your moderator. I'm Ashley McAlpin. I'm our head of marketing here at Rockerbox. We're really excited to have you be here. And we know that this is a really timely and valuable conversation. Performance on Meta has become, unpredictable in some cases, and acquisition costs are continuing to rise. And that's left a lot of marketers kind of under this pressure to diversify. But there's a lot of options out there between TikTok, Pinterest, Reddit, Snap, and other emerging channels. There's a lot of questions around this. I think it's going to be a really great conversation, and I'm excited to be joined by our panelists today. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves, but Victor, I will pass it to you to introduce yourself first.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Victor Castro. I am the former VP of Growth and General Manager at ByHeart, a baby formula startup. And before that, I was the SVP of Digital and E-commerce at Bonafide Health, a women's health supplement business. And a former, at both companies, former client and user of Rockerbox. Happy user, I would say. It's been great for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Victor.
Cool. I'm Ron Jacobson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rockerbox. Really excited to be here. And thanks to Victor for joining. Also, Victor was a former customer who pushed us very hard to continually be better every single day. So thank you, Victor. Our product team has some nightmares of your text messages asking us to build functionality for you, but we appreciate the care and affection either way.
Those were good times when you could influence the product very heavily early on. So
So we have you to thank for lots of things, Victor. Awesome. Well, we're gonna jump into the panel questions. As always, we like to keep these conversational. And so if you have any questions in the audience, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll take those questions as they come. Don't be afraid to drop a question that's slightly, maybe slightly adjacent to what we're talking to. We are happy to answer those and kind of let the conversation go where you all want it to be. These sessions are for you. So please chime in and ask questions as they come up. But we will go ahead and get started with the panel questions. So the first question that we have, and Victor, I'm going to address this one to you first, is what's driving the growing need for brands to diversify beyond Meta? Why now?
Why now? I mean, my personal perspective, right, is like the old saying, what's the best time to plant a tree? It was 10 years ago. Second best time is today. And that sort of applies here as well. And I think that diversification is not just media, right? We're seeing it. What happened in the last 2 months? Tariffs. People are like, oh my God, I got to diversify my manufacturers. Media spend is not that different, right? Any given time, we experienced it with iOS 14. I think it is important to diversify probably early. You don't want to react. You want to at least have a sense for what channels might be good enough for you. You don't have to always be diversified if you're like in a push to be super efficient. I get it. You push the most efficient channel and that's where you drive your volume. But you shouldn't be caught sort of blindsided by, oh, that's not performing. Where do I go next? And not even having any idea on how to execute on any other channels, right? So like what I tell my teams every time is like, let's just diversify, get a sense for what efficiency looks like in other channels. What is the second best channel? All right, do we use it? Maybe not, maybe we wait, but having the ability to pivot last minute and say, hey, all of a sudden Meta is not working, or the performance is not where I want to be, or I need to just spend more, period, for whatever reason. Having alternative channels where you can allocate spend, it's only going to help you. So I mean, now because you should have done it a while back. If you haven't, you should do it now. That's my take. You should always be ready to be diversified.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can't disagree that it's always, you don't want to have all of your eggs in one basket, and having your entire company dependent on Meta or any other one individual platform is never a good strategy. I will kind of give a counter take also though too. I see a lot of companies potentially spreading themselves too thin instead of just like doubling down on what is already working. So it's like a fine line to balance in the sense that you want to basically, it's so hard to find one channel that works, let alone 2 channels that work, that you want to make sure you're getting as much juice out of those as you possibly can. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, the changes will happen, or you'll get that new budgets, or you want to do some tests, and knowing that you're not fully reliant on one platform is super advantageous. It is interesting though too, because I remember going back to like I guess early 21 when interest rates first started rising. Was that 21 or 22? I think that was 21. No, 22, early 22 when interest rates first started rising. Everyone actually pulled back to Meta. So that was an interesting case where when the economy was great and everyone was spending on, everybody wanted them many channels. And then when things got rough, there's almost like a pullback to Meta. So it's interesting to see like when times are good, you diversify. When times are bad, you pull back. Ideally, you can do a little bit of both at both times. Though.
That's
Yeah, that's
interesting, Ron. Oh, sorry.
No,
I
no,
was just
no.
gonna
Go
say, like,
ahead.
I think that's an interesting one because it's almost like, the whole Buffett, be fearful when they're greedy, be greedy when they're fearful. And it's almost like I'd rather be the other way, to be honest, right? Like I'd rather be ready and diversify when things get bad, because they usually get back on the one channel you're concentrated on that you might be hurting, and sort of I don't know. Listen, I think every business has to have a feel for it. I think my biggest take is diversifying now, at least to know where you should be at. Like having that baseline reference point of this is what diversification looks like. You can always pull it back, go elsewhere, but sort of have the ability to do so on a potentially really fast turnaround.
Yeah, no, I mean it's fair. Like, I mean, you don't. The worst thing is the moment that like you have to diversify, you've never done it before, and you're scrambling because you don't have assets, you don't have any internal talent who can even like know how to run media in that channel. You don't have pixel set up. Like, that's just the little things. It sucks to be in that position. I know we get to this even further with other questions, but you then also get to the questions of like, what does it look like to diversify? Like, I've seen people also like diversify across too many channels with too small investments in each channel.
Totally.
So like they almost get no signal. But anyway, I don't mean to get ahead of the questions.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. And I actually think it's a good lead in into the next question. But really great points here. I mean, across volatility and meta and platform changes, competition, rising CPMs, like I think there's a lot of meat here. But I want to move on to the next question. So once a brand does decide to diversify, the next hurdle obviously is choosing where. It's kind of what you guys have been talking about. There are a ton of options. And I think that sometimes for marketers, the list can feel endless. And if they have been kind of predominantly spending on Meta, and that's been the majority of their budget has been there, and their optimizations have been there, it can be a little daunting to explore a different channel and really understand the nuances and like what should work for you if Meta has worked for you in the past. So how do you prioritize that? I'd like to know kind of what platforms you recommend testing into first, what criteria brands should be looking at. Ron, I'll pass this one to you first.
Generally, I kind of look at like two things, I think, with a platform to invest into. And I actually have a completely also counter take to this as well, but I'll say what my normal rule of thumb is. If I'm already going to spend the time and money and energy in a channel, ideally it's a channel that I think has some scale and that I can, really, really get something out of. Um, uh, so, and that comes from a couple of reasons. Like, there's often going to have to be creative assets you're going to have to develop specific to that channel. There's going to have to be net new training, net new potential talent you're going to need. Sorry about that. It's just hard to get into new channels. So, like, to spend all this time, energy, creative production, and then not be able to scale it past like 1% of your spend or 5%, whatever the percentage, is really rough. So, like, I look for scale. I think for there, it's also like measurability of that channel. Ideally, a channel that you have like some way that you can actually measure. Doesn't have to be a Rockerbox way, but a way you can measure. Those would be probably my two key tenets I look for when I'm thinking about investing in like that testing machine next time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that obviously it's going to be very particular to each brand and where they are and the size of the team and sort of their priorities in a given moment and the reason why you're diversifying, right? So like there's the sort of defensive diversification, which is like more preparation, prep work to be ready or to potentially identify something, but your business is doing well and you're just managing. And then there's the time where you like are starting to see sort of deterioration in performance and you're starting to figure out, oh, where are I going to go next? I think that is going to drive a lot of the decision making around what matters most. Practical terms, I mean, right? Size of team, assets, creative, support, etc. Um, if you are trying to be defensive, I think that you have probably the patience and time to put best foot forward and spend the time to do it right and sort of create new things, new assets, create new formats, try different channels. If you are opposite and you're sort of actively trying to figure out how to diversify, then you probably are ready to try to diversify in channels that you're probably most comfortable with, that follow as close of a pattern as others, right? So if you're heavy on meta, that's your creative, then pick a path. Maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's YouTube, maybe it's CTV, sort of like depends on your creative assets. But if you are defensively and you're like, no, that works fine, I just want to find something else that is maybe not as correlated to meta, and maybe you think about print or direct mail, or you think about audio. Um, that's sort of that's my thought process. That's sort of the two paths that I follow, and then which channel in each of those paths is going to really come down to resource availability, existing content, creative, and skill sets of the team or my agency partners. What can they support me to try to do it? Like, which time I want to test this month, and it has to be this month, and I need to find scalability first, or can I take 2 months to do it, and I just care about efficiency and doing it right? So I think that that's sort of the matrix of decision that you gotta review.
Yeah, I think that's a really good like counter to my position where I often talk about like scale as kind of the primary KPI, because it also leads to a world where everyone's doing that in a way. Like everybody wants a channel that's really highly scalable. Like of course you would, but that's also going to lead to like a lack of an arbitrage opportunity because you're investing in the same exact spot where everybody else is versus trying to find, you called out print and, other channels that maybe are a little bit harder, that maybe don't have that inherent scale, don't have that inherent measurability. There's something nice about actually investing in them also. There's just going to be less competition. There's potentially more room to kind of run there. So that's kind of the counter to my initial perspective on scale and measurability, which Victor kind of touched on well.
I do think that the one thing we probably agree the most is like measurability being the key. And measurability within your existing team and tooling, and like, right, you don't have the time to onboard a whole new measurability platform or partner. So like, yeah, what's easiest to measure, and that you feel comfortable measuring the right metrics for that channel. I think that that's probably a very important point.
Yeah, one of the things I've said. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I've said this a lot, but like I think the worst thing is you invest in a new channel, the test is over, and your team is like doing a retro, and you don't know if it performed. Like to me, that's the worst thing in the world because you just burn money. Versus having some way to measure it. Again, it could even be like, hey, we're going to go into this and we're going to use surveys as a way to measure it. Like, fine, at least you have something that is like a flag in the stand of how you're going to go about validating that channel. I think there are smarter ways to do that potentially, or more effective ways. But like the worst thing again is you do this test, you put all the time and energy into it, and afterwards you just have no idea. Because I've seen this happen many, many times. Clients then run the test a second time, this time with measurability, and it's just a waste of time and energy and money. So yeah, that's really why I put so much into the measurability side. It's just I don't like wasting money.
I wanna put a pin in this because we are gonna get back to measuring in the next couple of questions, and we're also gonna get into testing. And so I wanna come back to that. But one thing, Victor, that you actually mentioned that is a good lead in to the next question is around creative. So you had talked about kind of like, should you lean into channels that are more similar to Meta if you're having success on Meta and leverage the same creative, or should you kind of go a different direction? I think one of the questions that we kind of got, and again, all of these questions were actually developed from questions that our customers are asking around diversification, but how should brands approach creative strategy when they're entering a new channel? What are the risks of repurposing content? So if they're running campaigns and they're using creative on Meta, is there a risk for repurposing that same creative on a channel that's similar, maybe like TikTok, if they were on Instagram Reels or something like that? Kind of what's your take on that, Victor?
Yeah, I think it's actually super high risk, and I would not recommend doing it. I think that it's more of directionally. If you're doing it in one place, you probably can repurpose the raw assets, right? But it does require work of creative production and in reaching a different audience that is accustomed to a different type of creative. So I would never do a copy and paste, but it's more about like the direction. If you're on Meta successfully, you're probably producing high volume content, which means that you have a high library of raw assets that you can leverage to do other type of content. So like that's what I would say. If you are especially motion content, right? Which if you don't have as much, like if you wanted to open up something else, you may struggle to develop it. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is to consider, like, I think a lot about funnel position of the other channels. So like Meta has this great ability because it actually fits across the funnel. You can use it across at different levels of efficiency, and everybody does it differently. But you could play in a world where you have Meta, um, super awareness driving, and then you do some middle of the funnel objection, rejection, and then you do sort of really bottom of the funnel capture. Not every channel works the same way or as well in each funnel position. So like I think as you're thinking creative, you need to understand like which creative works best at what part of the funnel, and that you think that you actually can tell a real like story that fits within that channel audience. Like you know, not every thumb stopping is the same across platforms. So you can say like it's not the same thing on both. Like it's a different type of hook in the first few seconds. Yeah, so I think that the biggest risk is people just want to repurpose. They want to cut the corner and be like, oh, I have this thing. It's 15 seconds. I can run it here. Or like I can just go from vertical to landscape and just dump it into YouTube. I think that that's the biggest mistake people make with creative. Yeah.
I have nothing to add. I think that was, yeah.
No notes.
I'm with Victor on that. Seriously, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the easiest way, actually, most of the time, the easiest way is not the best way. It's a good life lesson. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So testing into new channels is obviously necessary. Ron, I think you kind of alluded to this, but also it can be risky. There's a lot of brands. I think, Ron, you actually mentioned like underspending, but overspending too soon can also lead to bad data. And underspending means you miss insights and you might follow, false indicators. So how should brands be thinking about budgeting for early stage testing to get meaningful learnings without wasting ad dollars? And Ron, I'll throw this one to you first.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like a spectrum. And I think there's a spectrum of basically like increasing levels of confidence in the test. And frankly, it's the more confident you are, frankly, the more money you're spending. That's kind of how you can get a more confident result in any test. I think it's okay, by the way, to not always be at the top 95% confidence of any test you need to run, especially as you're testing into new channels. So I don't think that, although that's like the gold standard, and you want to, I can understand why someone would say, well, you have to do a perfect test. I don't think that that's always necessary. I think it's really like what is the spectrum. So on like the cheaper side is what's the cheapest thing you can do to start understanding if there's something there. I've seen clients do this for things as simple as, am I getting more page visitors? Like I'm running this new test, I expect more people to come to my site. And if that doesn't happen right away, well, that's a fair reason to pause and to kind of see like what's going on. I think as you kind of move like towards the more expensive spectrum, on the right-hand side, as you get further, you could run a really nice, perfectly controlled incrementality test. And that's a great place to get to as well. So I really think it's actually going into a test, understanding like these different points and where you would potentially stop the test in a way that minimizes spend at different stages. So like, what is that earlier kind of signal you're going to know if the test is potentially going right or wrong, and what is like a later signal you're going to know if the test is going right or wrong. And I think it's just a lot, frankly, about being willing to act quickly. So if you see something seeming off quickly, pause quickly. Not all channels can facilitate that. Like a lot of linear TV buys, you're in for a good amount depending on where you are. Radio buys often you're in for a lot depending on where you are. Influencer as well potentially. But I like going into a test for the spectrum and kind of the soonest point on that kind of like path that you see something that makes you want to potentially go off and reevaluate.
Yeah, this one, I agree to some extent with Ron on this.
Please disagree. It's more fun when you disagree.
I know. I have a bunch of different ways to think about budgeting and about like, I don't know where to start. I'm trying to think through. Okay, so one, I have a few things that I think about when I talk to my team about how we do this, and I have these sayings. People like my team laughs at me because I say them all the time. One of them is like, "Don't tell me a channel doesn't work. Tell me a channel doesn't work yet." right? Like I believe that every channel has its position in your funnel at one point. It's just like we haven't figured out how to do it. That just goes to my point on it is that like, I don't mind retesting, and I don't mind retesting a few times in a row, which goes to Ron's point. Like I've cut a test early because early signals say this is not the right approach. Doesn't mean that that test is dead. Doesn't mean the channel is dead. It just means like, well, let's just quick pivot, try a different creative or angle or messaging or position, and then go at it again. So that's one thing. In terms of spend, I like to stick to something like a 70, 20, 10. If it's a small budget, if it's a big budget, maybe I go into like an 80, 10, 5, where like 70 or 80% is my core. The smaller amount, the 5 or 10% at the bottom is sort of like the moonshot new channel test. And then the 10 or 20% in the middle is the like testing for scale, right? Because it's one thing to test a channel and it's another thing to scale the channel. And like people sometimes confuse the two of them. It's like, yeah, we tested it, it doesn't work, or yeah, it's great. And then when they try to scale it, it just falls apart. So I think it's important, like upfront, as you're trying to set up the test and structure it, that you have a clear idea, to Ron's point, what are early signals, and they may not be the normal metrics you track on your core channels, right? You need to have a sense for early signals. Like I spent a lot of my time working in subscription-based businesses where we targeted a lot of CAC, and we care about payback period, and we care about LTV, which means that I may not know real performance for months. And so like I need to rely on early signals to say, hey, this behaves like something else I've seen, or it doesn't. And then you sort of stop the test or pause, and then you wait to see the readout. And then you need to know, what does a scale look like? Is it a scalable channel? I know a lot of folks who have gone into testing a channel, it's worked, and then they figured out they actually can't scale it because they never plan to what happens if blows the doors off and like, oh, it's actually capped. We can only spend 10% of our budget. And it's like, I'll take it, but it's not amazing. So yeah, I think that like identifying early signals for performance, and then understanding the real scalability of the channel, and then to Ron's point, pivoting or acting, be ready to act quickly. And acting quickly doesn't mean killing it. It just means pivoting or retesting again. That's my take.
I will say though, I mean, just to also, talk my own book for a second. There's a reason incrementality tests are great. So like I will say, like if you can do it and you have the budget to do it, as a channel that can do it, incrementality testing is a really effective way to really understand the impact of a channel. There are different ways you could do it: scale up tests, hold out tests, but it's something that we've been leaning into a lot at Rockerbox in the last year. Had a lot of success with our customers doing it. With some pros and cons. I mean, it can be a really great way to understand how the channel is performing, but it's very point in time also. So I think trying to balance the incrementality test I ran for Meta 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago versus performance today can also be really difficult as well. So but we have a lot of clients having success with incrementality tests, and we're happy to help design them for clients. We have some clients who actually come back and share their results with us, which is also great.
I don't know if it fits in this question, but I'm going to share it because I have a hot take on incrementality testing.
All right.
I don't know how popular it may be.
Let's hear it.
So one of the things that I think a lot, especially diversifying away from Meta, like a common theme around incrementality testing is like Meta is our core and everything has to be incremental. And like sometimes I like to like challenge the question, be like, how do you know that it's not Meta who needs to be incremental to your other channel because your other channel actually is more efficient? And like, when you start with one, you say like default and de facto is like, that's my channel. And everything else has a huge high burden to pass, which is almost impossible for them at some point. And so like that's one of the things that I think a lot about when I'm testing something is like where in the funnel it sits matters a lot more, like the incrementality against my default existing channel. Because if I try, like a perfect example, Ron knows because I did this a lot early on, which was like direct mail testing or radio, right? We did a lot of radio work. It was like, is it incremental? Because direct mail and radio might have a longer attribution window. It might not look it. But in reality, actually, they are the precursor to your meta spend. And then you need to think about whether your meta spend on top is actually incremental to your original spend. I like to challenge my team of thinking through the position of the funnel of your testing channel to understand incrementality more than just like, oh, is it not driving anybody else? Well, you might be doing it more efficiently than you think. And I think that is part of the incrementality. It's not just, is it new, but it's more efficient. Anyway,
Well,
sorry.
that's
I don't know
also
if
where
you
I
copy
think.
it or not.
Well, that's also where I do think incrementality testing doesn't have any concept of path to conversion, like inherently in it, right? You can kind of try to back into it, but it doesn't inherently have that. And that's where I think being able to combine like an MTA-based approach where you can say, okay, folks we saw radio to, then engage with X, and then come to our site. Like that starts to give you a different perspective in your marketing. So incrementality testing alone it's not a panacea. That path to conversion based, I say path to conversion, you say funnel based approach, and I actually like your phrasing more of it. It is one of the main gaps that you have with incrementality testing, to be frank.
Yeah, and I think those are great points, and I think ultimately it's why we've, as a company, tend to lean into this concept of unified measurement, right? And like, and really challenging our customers to think more holistically about the way that they're measuring all of their channels. But that is a session that we've had and a session for another day. So I am going to keep pressing into our next question is actually going a little bit deeper into this concept of measurement. Because not all metrics tell the full story, especially when you're testing into unfamiliar platforms. So I'd love to know from your perspective, and Ron, I'll start with you, which metrics are most useful in evaluating early performance on a new platform, and what signals are often misleading?
The classic, it depends. I mean, I think it depends on what the platform is. I think it depends on what your goal for that platform is. I think it depends on, as Victor would say, where that platform is supposed to sit in the funnel. It depends on your sales cycle. It really depends. There's not one answer to this. I kind of answer a different question. No matter what, you need to have this answered before you run a test though. So knowing your business, knowing the idiosyncrasies of your business, of your CAC, of your profitability, all the different aspects that go into your business. When you are running a channel, you need to know what is going to be that early performance indicator for that one specific test that's right for your business. I don't think there is a generic answer to this.
I agree. There isn't. I think it's highly dependent on a lot of things. Agree to your point that you need to know what it is. I would also say like you may not have it right the first time, and you need to think through like that was the wrong metric. Like I have found myself learning about a channel's like behavior post test. I mean like we were looking at the whole wrong way. It wasn't about any of the metric that we thought it was. It was about like, listen, there's a little value, especially, again, I go back to subscription business, customer quality. It's a huge, huge, huge metric for us. You don't know it until way later. And so like, if you're relying on the early metrics, you need to find a way to be able to relate your long-term performance into like an early signal. And it can be a lot of things, right? Like, hey, you know what? CAC is higher or conversion rate is worse, but it's mostly subscribers. Make sure that you're tracking that because that's going to probably give you a signal that is early enough, even though your other metrics are terrible, your click-throughs are terrible, etc. So I'd say like be flexible in what you measure. It requires some intellectual honesty. People can always feel like pressure to be like, no, it's this other metric now. It looks great. Let's do that. You gotta have that honesty with yourself and be like, no, let's not just change it for the sake of improving the numbers. Let's change it because it makes sense for the business. I think that's my take.
That's why I believe so much. Like you need to have this answered before you run the test, because that on the point of switching KPIs, I see this with CTV a lot, particularly where clients go into CTV and they say, this is going to be a performance channel for me, right? And it's going to hit this like CPA or cost per new visitor or whatever that is, right? And they're like 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is into the test, and they're completely not there at all. And then they come back and go, well, actually, this is more of a brand play, a reach play. It's all about getting a cheap CPM in front of our audience. I'm like, no, well, then that's objectively not why you launched this channel. That's not to say that can't be a reason to spend in the channel, but like, let's acknowledge that that's, you're kind of shifting the goalpost there.
Good point. And I think a challenge, right, for marketers, especially when you're being kind of held to the fire a lot of the time with what's working and what's not, and how are you measuring that? So, and I think there probably is something that we could like click deeper into, like how do you decide what you're going to like how do you decide what the goal of a channel is going to be before you go into a test? Like what are, and Victor, I'd love to kind of have your thoughts on that. Like what are the kind of the stages that you go through when you're like, okay, I'm going to test a new channel. I need to figure out what this channel, like what am I ultimately looking to test here, and like what is the metric going to be? Like what do you go through in your head?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to an earlier question about like how do you pick which channel, right? You got to go through this decision matrix, and you must have a thesis for what you're trying to do, right? So, I am trying to fix my upper funnel because it seems like my volumes are not there, and my bottom funnel is not performing as well. So that's my thesis for testing a new channel. That means I'm going to go test up funnel, which means I'm going to pick channels that are more on the awareness side, and so that's going to dictate my metrics. Being like, I'm not gonna test an upper funnel channel like direct mail and try to make it be like, oh, it's click through 0. Nobody clicks on direct mail, right? And so like you gotta really align your metrics to the purpose and funnel position of the channel you're testing. But it starts with like the matrix that we talked about. Like, is this offensively? Is this aggressively? Is this something you need to do? Is it something like a backup? That will dictate the channel. Once you have the channel nailed down, you got to figure out where in the funnel it sits. Depending on where it sits, that's what determines your metrics, because that you must have a particular goal in your mind as to what you're trying to accomplish with this. It could be awareness, fill the funnel, fill the bucket with all your new volume, or is it just like bottom of the funnel, capture demand that exists? That will dictate that. So like starts with the thesis.
Yeah. Sydney has a question. So she said, I'm curious what the best practice would be regarding third-party clients or sponsors and their expectations regarding performance. I often find that external parties will use a general term to describe performance, such as impressions, yet not really understand how that particular metric is measured. How can you bridge this gap when it happens?
I mean, I'll just say one quick thing. I don't think impressions is ever a KPI. Like I can get anyone. If I have a side business, by the way. If anybody ever wants a lot of impressions, I promise I'll get that for you. So just hit me up on the side. I do this on weekends. I moonlight doing this. So I promise I can get you impressions. But
Don't trust it.
listen, I know I'm joking, but Sydney actually brings up a good point. Like I've seen this a lot of times where like impressions is the KPI that actually is talked about oftentimes by partners, agencies and stuff as like a vanity metrics to pretend that they're doing something on your behalf. So like at a minimum, I definitely would not do that, or rather I would not allow your partners to do that. I think the main practice, at least I've seen, and Victor actually probably can speak better to this too, is if you're working with a third party, I think it's on you to kind of hold them to account. It's on you to tell them how they're going to be measured, what data they're going to use, how they're going to get access to that data. And that puts more of a burden on you because you kind of have to be able to provide that. And sometimes I think clients want something simpler, which is just them, self-grading themselves. But I think the burden is on you to do that. Now, mind you, I actually have nothing with a vendor coming back and giving a counter narrative and saying, listen, here's your reporting, here's your stuff. Here's also what I see. Fair enough. They might know their channel differently than I do. They know their business different than I do. And I've actually had sometimes my opinion evolve on like how to measure a channel based off how vendors report there. But I think it's on the brands. It's the brand's job to kind of hold their vendors to account.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I would like this happens. I've done often, partners who try to pitch me on, oh, this impressions, the quality of the impressions is the best part when they try to measure quality of an impression, which is like, how do you even know? Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, being on the brand side, I can do this in a couple different ways. One is like I try to avoid people who just do that. One, two, I really, I mean, to Ron's point, it's on me, and I have my own measurement, which is going to drive my decision around scaling or continuing and investing into a channel. So like they can tell me until they're blue in the face about the impressions, the quality of the impressions, and it needs to fit my business goals and my business metrics. I try to only work with partners or try to sort of find a compromise with partners where like they can tell me all the data that works for them, including their impressions, but that we agree on like the decision point is going to be based on alternative metrics or something beyond impressions. I think impressions is super flawed. It is heavily used on the brand side. I know a lot of folks on the brand side, a lot of agencies there trying to buy media and sort of call out impressions as a metric. I think that, yeah, one way to think about it is that impressions is sort of like a lazy way to find a metric that you need to work hard enough. Like there is no business where there isn't a better metric than impressions.
No, I'll give to be generous, I would say. Listen, if you have two vendors that somehow are able to get you the same impressions, we could talk about what that means, and one gets a lower CPM. Like, fair enough. There's between the two, I'd rather a lower CPM for the same impression, but that's my generous perspective.
It's never the same impression. That's the problem.
That is true too.
Yeah, and it's very hard to actually validate. Completely fair points. Thanks for the question, Sydney. Okay, we've got one more question for the panel, and then if you all have questions, please drop them in the chat. We would love to continue the conversation. We've got I've got these two on the calendar for 22 more minutes, so if you have questions, drop them here. So the final question that we have, even with best intentions, diversification efforts can fail. It happens, right? So whether it's chasing trends or misjudging a creative fit, like we talked about earlier, or maybe reusing creative and it falling flat, or just failing to measure properly and failing to identify those right metrics up front. There are patterns behind what works and what doesn't. So I'd love to hear kind of from your perspective, what are some of the common mistakes that brands make when they're trying to diversify and what separates those who do it successfully? And Victor, I'll kind of toss this one to you first.
We talked a little bit about them, right? So we said creative is always a risk of just reuse, but also it goes beyond creative, right? Creative is sort of like the first part. And yeah, it's about messaging and catching the prospect's eye and all that stuff. But even if for some miracle your creative works just as well, you don't want to also necessarily match the same experience on site. I'm a big believer in, sort of testing multiple experiences against media to see what works best, because every audience is going to have a different driver for why they're actually coming to see what you're selling. And so I tend to think of like, don't just replicate what you're doing in a different channel, like leverage your assets, but change it. One. The other one is, Ron talked a little bit about this, like spreading yourself too thin. You should never be testing 6 channels at once. You have to have a thesis. Your thesis shouldn't be like any channel works or all these channels will work. You must have one thesis that you think one channel will work for you for some reason and stick to that one. And it doesn't have to be one at a time. You can test more than one, but you shouldn't be testing more than a couple, and you need to have the budget to be able to do it properly. And my last one is lack of patience, right? And it's not necessarily the growth person, hands on keyboard, it's not necessarily the VP of growth. It's usually from further up, right? It goes all the way up, and especially when it's a big channel, get a lot of eyes on it, and they have no patience, right? After 3 days, they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" Well, CPA is like 5 times better. Shut it down. We don't want to waste any more money. The CFO is on your case. And so like a lot of the work around testing for like a head of growth is managing up expectations of what it's going to take, how long it will take, what does a steady state look like. So patience, lack of patience is like a huge problem from my perspective.
You said like 5 things, all good, and then number 5 was the one I was going to focus on. So you kind of screwed me there, Victor. But I guess a slightly different version of lack of patience might be just not really being all in. So it's kind of, I think the other side of it is like, yeah, let's test a channel, et cetera, et cetera. And to Victor's point, a couple of days go by, it doesn't look good. Oh, we're done. And I think Ashley probably would yell at me sometimes as CEO when I've probably had lack of patience on an investment that she's making, and I freaked out early. And she's like, "Ron, you're being stupid, and we need to keep doing this." And I'll punt it to Ashley after this because I bet she believes that. But and she's not wrong if she does. But it's sort of like, you can't like put a fire out 90%. Like you need to do 100% of a fire. It's kind of the same thing with like testing. Like you need to just, if you're doing testing, you got to do it. And just, I think, be really willing for it to fail, which is hard. It's hard as a company with limited resources. And, there's only so many things you can do at once to be okay with failure. But I think like not being okay with failure and not being like actually committed are kind of two sides of the same coin. So I've seen that happen a lot. Ashley, I'll throw it to you. Am I
Yeah.
have I been that guy before?
You definitely have that. And I would say that my biggest piece of advice is that you have to be like, as the marketer, you have to be confident going into it and willing for it to fail, even when you stand up confidently against someone who says it's not going to work. Because I think what's easiest to do, especially when you have your CEO pressuring you, or at a larger company, maybe the CFO is pressuring you and you're spending a lot of money, is to say, okay, never mind. Like, we'll just back off. Right. Because it kind of saves everybody in theory, but actually it just screws everybody over, right? Because you can't actually ever get to the end point if you jump ship every time. And I think it's really easy to jump ship when someone is challenging what you're doing. And so I'd say that's my biggest advice. If I could go back, right, the 3 years that we've worked together, Ron, and push back against you a little bit more a couple of times, I probably would. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of good points here around managing expectations. And the only other thing that I would add is that, like, I think it's really hard to successfully test into a new channel if you don't understand why the channels that you're already operating on work. Because if you don't understand why those are working for you or what role they're playing, it's almost impossible to identify and test into a new channel, because you're just going to be shooting in the dark when it comes to all of the things we talked about, right? When it comes to creative, when it comes to identifying metrics, like, you're not going to have any of those answers if you don't understand what's working for you right now. I would almost say there's no point in testing into new channels if you don't know why your current channels are working. Even if they're working really well, you have to know why. And that's a whole challenge in and of itself.
Can I throw a curveball on this entire thing and do a random other question? And I don't allow it depends on your business type answers, which I'm very prone to give, or apt to give rather. What if no, I can't say if you had to say back half of the year, what's the number one channel that you're bullish on? Net new channel, probably not like a meta Google. What's like that net new channel you're bullish on and you think brands are probably not testing into that they should be testing into? I'll start with you, Ashley. How about you?
Oh, you're gonna throw it to me? Come on, Ron.
Why not? You can take a minute. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably, and it's not, so part of your question that's kind of hanging me up is that, at the end where you said, that they're probably not testing into, I don't know that is the case, but I would say that CTV is continuing to change my mind on, performance effectiveness. And I think that there's like technology is continuing to evolve. The way that people are consuming CTV ads is continuing to change. And I think that brands who are early, especially so from my perspective, right? And we're talking about consumer businesses for the most part here. We're talking about brands that are selling to consumers. But even on the B2B side, I think that there's a lot of change happening around CTV. And I think to some extent it's still a greenfield. Like, there's a ton of opportunity there, and it's relatively low threshold to start investing. Like, obviously we have creative lift and cost and things like that, but I think that brands, especially scaling brands, maybe who are operating on social or like kind of doing search and social and have kind of those as their core mix, adding CTV or any type of TV can be intimidating, but I think what we've seen with brands is that it's really rewarding. And it's surprising me how it's not just a top of channel, right? It does more than I think I originally had kind of like dog-eared it as like, okay, well, that's brand, it's top of funnel. I don't necessarily think that is true anymore, and it's continuing to evolve.
Okay. CTV. We got one vote there. Victor, what are you going in?
I go, man. I just can't get past like direct mail.
Ooh.
still underutilized, which is wild because you and I were doing this 6 years ago, and it's still under. Like I talked to a lot of folks, I'm like, yeah, and I'll give you the reasons why. One, it's probably one of the most trackable, measurable channels with like hard proof of performance. Incrementality is a little bit different. You got to think about what came first, but a matchback. You do a match, you know exactly who got the piece, and you know that they came by. You know how long it took him to come back. There's a lot of value in that. And I like to start there first because it also sets a bit of like a baseline for other channels to perform against. And even though it's been growing for years, and there's a lot more providers and partners and a lot of folks doing it, it still feels very underutilized, and the scale is still out there. Like there's tons of scale available in that space. So yeah, I think direct mail is kind of like a cool one to try. A little different.
Do you think there's Victor, do you think that there are exceptions where direct mail would not be something that you recommend for a brand? Like I'm thinking, you know, is there like a cost threshold depending on what they sell, or like, you know, where would you put the boundaries? Do you think direct mail go?
I almost haven't seen a business for whom direct mail doesn't work. Like, and I go back to my original comment, like it doesn't work yet. And like, it's a combination of creative, offer, audience, targeting. I wish I had actually a paper business to be doing this because I love direct mail. I think that it has so much potential, a lot of variety of formats, right? It's like having custom ad units. You can do whatever you want. You can say as much as you want, and it has a longer life, and it lives in someone's mailbox or countertop or kitchen for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It reaches up to 4 or 5 more people than the original impression because the whole household can see it. You know, it has so much upside. It can be done so affordably. So I'm a huge fan of direct mail. I think it's a very easy, quote unquote, easy to execute and learn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, I even think about my own, like as a consumer, like I think about the pile of mail that sits on my counter and like the direct mail pieces that are on top. And I think like one of the key advantages to direct mail is that a lot of brands aren't thinking about direct mail right now. They kind of like set it aside as a, I mean, like an antiquated option, right? Like they think, oh, there's just so many other things that we can do and it's higher tech and we have more whatever. And so sometimes there is a lot of value in like going back to core basics, right? So Ron, what is your answer to the question?
I think we're at time, people. I don't know.
I was expecting billboard.
No, I don't know enough about this channel to be honest with you, so I should learn more, but I'm intrigued by just like texting as a channel, not in the SMS sense of like just a random code being sent to you, but ways to interact with businesses conversationally via text message and how you can leverage that for your business. I just feel like a lot of times these days people don't want to call a brand, they want to interact with them, they want to text and communicate, and I feel like there's a decent opportunity there to take advantage of that for your business. So I've seen anecdotally some company, Victor might know this better than me, or maybe you actually too, but like companies that are like trying to figure out like WhatsApp-based advertising and I guess like Facebook's general messenger-based advertising. But I find myself personally like more just like texting with brands or even services I want to work with, and I feel like they could upsell me better than they are. And I'm like already there. I'm already engaging. I'm already talking to them, and they're just like not going for the ask.
Yeah. And I think there's some brands that are actually doing that really well. I know they're a competitor to ByHeart, but Bobby, the formula company, they actually are texting. So I have a newborn, I have a 10-week-old. And so I'm getting a lot of like formula and like types of ads. And they actually have been texting me, and they texted me to invite me to like a webinar, which I thought like, okay, this is interesting. We don't see a lot of webinars in the consumer marketing space. But I registered and I even sent in questions, and I thought, you know what, consumers are so much easier to work with than people in business. So maybe webinars should have been a channel that it's not really an advertising channel, but just interesting. And I think, Ron, that speaks back to your point, right? Like they texted me and then had a conversation with me, which is pretty effective. If I were looking at formula, I think I would look there. ByHeart as well.
By the way, I'll say, like, I live in New York and the mayor election's happening. I've been getting texts nonstop from all the candidates. And I will say they surprisingly respond to me. I thought it was all just like, standard outreach stuff, but I often will reply and give my opinion. And I've gotten more responses than I thought, and like thoughtful responses. So I don't know. If politicians can do it, why can't brands do it?
Yeah. Well, Mike has a question I want to get to before we jump off. Mike said, I find it difficult to set expectations and realistic timelines when testing new channels. Finding that balance between being too short and too long isn't an exact science and likely varies org to org. Do you guys have any insight on that?
I'll say, like, on the pure like incrementality testing side, we're very explicit of this is how long it's going to take. This is how much money you're going to spend. Here's what you need to see before the test is completed. We actually will provide, well, this is a learning of ours too. We now provide multiple versions of a test, each with increasing levels of confidence, with a recommendation of which one we think is sufficient. But we do recognize some orgs can't bite the bullet for the most, the highest confidence, longest test, higher power, most expensive test. So we want to give spectrums of that. But with incrementality testing, you can find pretty, well, rather as close to scientifically proven ways to get that answer. That might be a helpful way for you to approach it for your organization, but that's running a very classically structured hold out test and control kind of test.
Yeah, I think about the length in a couple of ways. One is, it's funny, we have figured this out for the user experience side of things, right? We all run A/B tests on our websites and landing pages, etc., and we are like, there's not a patience problem there anymore. There used to be, but then it's been sort of normalized, and people are like, no, you run a test, it takes X number of weeks depending on your traffic, and you know how long it takes to get a read. Nobody questions that. We haven't gotten there on the media side yet, right? That's one thing I would say. Number two is part of your test structure is to actually set a clear timeline. Like when I set a test, I need to know enough to get a rough idea on how much money it costs, given a certain level of performance that I would expect to have, big range, whatever. And I think that, while you need to be patient, doesn't mean you need to be throwing more money at it than you originally planned just for the sake of getting more volume or more read. Like my mind is, if you structure the test properly, your budget size matches what your expectations were, and you know how long it takes to use up that budget, and that's how long it runs, and that's it. Like it either performs or it doesn't. I don't know. I think that the challenge is when people are like, we're going to test it, and they don't put a finite time to it. They're like, we're going to test it. And so then it's a constant conversation every week. I'm like, oh, do we have a good read? Not yet. Oh, do we have a good read? Not yet. And they just keep pushing it. And so that's where things get a little iffy. But if you start like, this is a 4-week test, it's going to cost $50K. We're going to run it. This is what expectation is in terms of range on this metric. You might have run it for too long, but you were set on that period, and that's where your read is, and you move on.
Yeah, that also helps with some of the other things that we talked about, right? With like setting expectations to all of the outside people who might be coming in and saying like, hey, is this working? Is this not working? You can push back and say, when we started this test, we said we were going to give it 4 weeks. We said we were going to get this amount of budget. And it gives you kind of space to make those decisions. Ron, any last thoughts?
If anybody needs great marketing help or advice, you should reach out to Victor. He's a smart guy.
Not everybody at once.
Ashley too, but Ashley, Ashley's busy.
Awesome. Well, Victor, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you and your insights and all of the, to Ron's point earlier in the session, all of the great feedback that you've offered to Rockerbox as a company, and your insights in these webinars. We will definitely invite you back until you tell us to stop. We love having you on these sessions. So thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, this will be in your inbox shortly. If you have any additional questions, you can find us at rockerbox.com. Victor, if anybody has a question for you, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, great. Yeah. You can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. and I answer my emails. I answer my LinkedIn messages. Feel free to connect there. If you really must, you can email me. My email is vcastro@gmail.com. I can put it in the notes, I guess. Everybody can have it. Yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. And I
Thanks,
hope you have
everybody.
a wonderful week.
Thank you all.